Every once in a while, someone on the internet will come up with an insanely dumb power scaling question, and everyone collectively loses their minds about it. Rather than a trend or a meme, I consider this a cycle, and rather than tell you guys, no, one gorilla does not in fact take out 100 humans, I am instead going to contribute to the problem by raising my own question. Can 100 Roys be BASE Sigurd? To start things off, we'll be using SRPG Studio. Why am I using the ugliest software imaginable to create this epic battle simulation? Well, it's simple. It's because Kaga used it for the Visteria Saga games. And as I'm striving to be in the list of top 100 Kaga glazers, it's only natural for me to try emulate him as much as possible. So first off, what is BASE Sigurd? Well, it's quite literally the unit you get on turn 1 of FE4's prologue chapter. So no silver sword, turf ring, or any other fancy stuff you can get your hands on in FE4. Even at base, it's important to stress how strong Sigurd actually is, as he's often hailed as the literal best unit in Genealogy of the Holy War, who can solo half the game on his lonesome. He essentially joins Promoted in a class that has the strongest version of Kanto to ever exist in Fire Emblem, and has good starting stats and movement in a game with massive maps. However, one issue we found ourselves having when building Sigurd is the fact that FE4 units don't actually have a con stat, and so we basically have to give Sigurd one ourselves. You see, despite FE4 not having a constitution stat, Gracia does, and as both games are set in Judgro, they consequently share a couple of units. And one such unit is Finn, who joins with a constitution stat of 9. Now we just make Sigurd's con stat 9, right? Well, no, I disagree. For one, Finn canonically is a man in his 30s who starved himself for God knows how long for the sake of feeding his children. And as Constitution is based off a unit's physical build, I think it's fair to assume that Finn isn't the most healthy of individuals. And so it's fair to say that Sigurd would have just a bit more meat on his bones than the man who literally spent the majority of his adult life on the run. Since Finn can be interpreted as being smaller than Sigurd due to the reasons previously stated, we can move on to another unit who shared between the games. Diarmut, or Diarmut, however you say his name. Diarmut has a constitution stat of 11 in FE5, which matches up nicely with how tall he is according to FE4's height chart. And since Sigurd isn't as tall as Diarmut, but isn't as deprived as Finn, I'll give him a humble constitution stat of 10. And since we have BASE Sigurd out the way, let's move on to Roy. For Roy, we just did a straight insert of his stats and inventory from the first map of Binding Blade. Nothing too special. No promotion, no Binding Blade, no nothing. Just 100 base Roys. If Sigurd has too much of an easy time clearing them out, we may have to buff the army of Roys just a little bit, but we'll cross that bridge when we have to. As a bit of a side note, it was funny to actually have to reduce some stats like HP and movement to below the default in SRPG Studio, but to be expected for a unit who's in competition for being the worst lord in Fire Emblem. For those of you curious to how we dealt with weapons, as Roy and Sigurd both come from games with different strength and accuracies for their respective items, we simply gave their weapons their stat lines from their respective games. So Roy's Iron Sword has 5 might, and Sigurd's Steel Sword has 50 uses. As for the weapon triangle, we used the FE4 bonuses and penalties, since Sigurd is already losing in terms of numbers, so giving him his native weapon triangle bonuses doesn't seem too overly biased in my opinion. The last thing left for us to make was simple. We had to actually make the 100 Roys by hitting copy and paste 100 times. And we also had to decide on their formation. I opted in for this diamond shape which has the Roys placed 2 squares away from each other. This gives us 3 distinct layers of Roys, which just looks nice, and seems more realistic than placing them all adjacent to each other. But with the formation and technicalities set in stone, it's time for us to find out if 100 Roys working together can beat one singular BASE Sigurd. Starting off, Sigurd totally demolishes the first Roy, as he straight up one-shots him. But then the enemy turn happened, and yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Sigurd gets absolutely touched by the 100 Roys. One thing that I failed to mention earlier is that every single Roy comes packing with a rapier. And in case you didn't know, rapiers are effective against horses. And guess what Sigurd is? That's right, he's a horse. It physically pains me to say this, but Sigurd doesn't even last a single enemy phase. My guy was getting violated so hard I had to turn off the animation so the video doesn't get taken down off YouTube. Sure, maybe Sigurd can proc a few good levels, maybe boost his avoid or defense, but the sad truth is that the numbers really do matter here. And so on a really good turn where he gets super lucky, he can take out like 10 Roys max. Sure, theoretically if Sigurd could dodge all these 66% and survive one singular enemy turn, yeah, he can abuse his Canto and 9 move to hit and run all the Roys down to the last man, but he simply can't survive all those rapier hits. And you wanna know what makes this especially hilarious? There's a very simple way for Sigurd to win here, and you wanna know what it's called? It's called dismounting. But guess what? FE4 is the only Kaga game post Mystery of the Emblem to not allow for your units to dismount. But even then, this is technically only a half-truth, because Seliph, and only Seliph might I add, can dismount at will once promoted. And so if Seliph was in the arena with these Roys instead, it would be so one-sided that I might have had to actually get an adult in the room with them. But actually, forget dismounting, because Seliph has a built-in Nihil at base, so he'd be immune to weapon effectiveness from the rapier regardless. But this video isn't about him, it's about Sigurd. And as all of the evidence I've displayed today shows you, I can unfortunately say with certainty that 100 Roys do in fact no-diff one base Sigurd, but only because Kaga decided to do a little bit of trolling and remove dismounts from FE4. But with all that said and done, there's nothing left for me to say, and so with that, I'll just have to see you guys later.